I was married off, no, handed over like a diplomatic glass of wine meant to sweeten negotiations. The throne room gleamed like a blade. Gold filigree crawled up marble columns. Crystal chandeliers shed cold light that made everyone's jewels look like icicles. Courtiers arranged themselves in tiers the way birds arrange themselves on wires, elegant, vicious, and pretending not to notice anything except what could be weaponized later. A procession of officials in perfumed brocade lined the carpet, each carrying a different flavor of solemnity. Somewhere a choir hummed a sterile hymn, as if my life weren't being neatly decanted into a cup I'd never ordered. I stood where they planted me, at the foot of the dais, with my hands folded so tightly the knuckles ached. My mother's clan crest sat heavy on my shoulder, embroidery tight enough to bruise. Smile. Someone behind me breathed, as if this were a portrait. I showed them teeth. Across from me, he arrived. Kane of the border, soldier, exile, the blade they kept in a velvet sheath and pretended was a friendly letter opener. He wore a severe dress uniform that drank the light. Epaulets stripped bare, no colors of a pack, no sigil of a family. Broad-shouldered, tall, and so still he made statues look flighty. His face had the kind of harsh symmetry sculptors try to fix with a chisel and give up on. His eyes were iron filings. The court stared at him the way a town stares at a thundercloud and says, "Lovely weather." "By this union," the chancellor intoned, "we set old fires into ash and build a road from their remains." How poetic. Was I the ash or the road? I couldn't decide. The word Omega rode every whisper like a burr. I wore it the way I wore my collar. Too tight, too visible, the price of making everyone else comfortable. Kane stepped forward at the appointed sentence, boots landing with the measured certainty of a drumbeat. He stopped an exact arm's length from me, as if he'd practiced the distance more than the words. The chancellor offered the ceremonial ribbon. We both reached. His glove brushed my wrist. A flare of heat shot up my arm, not the bonding heat they like to tell stories about, all roses and moonlight. Just blood stubbornly refusing to freeze in this glacial hall. My instincts rattled their cage. I smiled wider, the pleasant kind of smile you give before biting. "Don't worry," I said softly, for his ears alone. "I'm perfectly trained. I sit, I heal, I don't fetch." His gaze flicked to my mouth, then back to my eyes. His voice came low, scraping like flint. "If you think I want another Omega to break, try again." A tiny crack ran through the ice in my chest. I hated that it ran toward him. The ribbon tied our wrists. The choir swelled like a polite tidal wave. The chancellor's staff struck marble, ringing a sound that made it official in the way a slammed door is official. My stomach folded into itself. The room tilted just enough to remind me I hadn't eaten since dawn. Mother's fingers tightened on Father's arm in the first row, her version of pride. Father didn't look at me at all. Kane's jaw barely moved. "Breathe," he said. "I am, liar." A corner of my mouth twitched against my will. Annoying man. The vows were not vows so much as legislation read aloud, obligations, provisions, penalties, a parade of clauses that could be looped into a noose. I recited on cue, tongue clean, voice steady. The ribbon chafed, and all I could think was how to untie it without anyone noticing. My pulse counted the seconds like tally marks scratched into a cell wall. When it was done, a courtier appeared with a silver goblet, wine for sealing, tart, and celebratory. I took a sip and tasted dust and cherries. Kane took his and didn't seem to taste anything at all. The chancellor lifted our bound hands for the crowd to applaud. They clapped the way people clap at a funeral for a person they never liked but respected out of habit. My new husband, what an extravagant word for a stranger, angled closer so only I could hear. "You can stop pretending to enjoy this." "Oh, good," I murmured. "I was worried about your feelings." He huffed something that might have been a laugh if he were built of anything but granite. Up close there were details the court could not see. The faint shadow of sleeplessness under his eyes, a slice of old scar along his collar line, the way his shoulders carried not just a uniform but a decision already made. He had the look of a man who chose the losing road and kept walking because it was honest. And I chose not to be chosen. I chose resistance. Petty perhaps, but pettiness is a kind of spine when the world wants you boneless. We returned toward the crowd for formal blessings. People who had negotiated my life like grain prices came up one after another to press dry lips to the back of my hand, or to cluck sympathetic nothings, or to congratulate Kane on securing a compliant alliance. I met each gaze as if I were cataloging debts to collect later. Names, scents, tells. The woman whose perfume arrived before she did. The lord with a nervous habit of wetting his lips. Before he lied, the counselor whose ring marked him as loyal to a faction that preferred Omega's silent and kneeling. A page stumbled. The goblet sloshed. I stepped back before red stained white. Old reflexes never quite die. And Kane's hand rose, steadying the cup before it could spill. He moved fast. His grip was gentle. He released the stem at once, as if sudden touch were a line he'd sworn not to cross. Reflex, he said to no one in particular. So you are alive under there, I said. He didn't look at me, but the edge of his mouth dipped. Barely. The procession spiraled toward its end, and with it, the illusion that anything about this was mine. The ribbon was untied at last. My skin prickled where it had been, a pale bracelet of temporary captivity. Applause faded into the louder silence of expectation. We would parade through halls. We would accept gifts. We would stand at a balcony so they could see two silhouettes and tell themselves it meant peace. A pretty prison is still a prison. Kane turned to me then, proper and formal, the perfect soldier cast in frost. Theo. He said my name carefully, like it mattered to pronounce it right the first time. We'll leave by the side corridor. Less spectacle. Is that an order? I asked. Too sweet. Or a courtesy you learn from a manual? It's a mercy, he said. I'm poor at spectacle. Lucky us, I said, because if I didn't say something sharp, I might say something true, like thank you. We walked. Marble swallowed our footsteps. The side corridor was colder, the mosaics less grand, as if the palace saved its warmth for the places where the public could admire it. He kept precisely half a stride ahead. A man who had learned to be a wall without pressing. The ribbon ghost itched my wrist. I rubbed the skin until it warmed. I won't heal, I said at last, because the corridor felt like a confession booth. He didn't stop. And I won't leash you. That startled me more than I let show. Bold, considering tradition. Tradition hasn't done me many favors, he said. Nor me, I said. Our voices floated like frost breath. We reached a door that led into a smaller hall, wood-paneled, quiet, smelling faintly of beeswax and old books. For a heartbeat the world narrowed to the hinge creak and the way he stood aside to let me pass first. Not dominance. Not deference. A choice, plain as a cup of water. I stepped through, spine straight, chin up, heart beating a drumline under the ribs. This was a temporary sentence, I told myself. A term. A test I would pass without surrendering the one thing that still belonged to me. The right to choose. Even if all I could choose was the direction of my stare, and the shape of my words. If fate wanted me kneeling, it should have been faster. I lifted my head and smiled like a blade. The war, I decided, would be fought in rooms exactly like this. Quiet, polished, with good acoustics for truth. And if he thought I'd turn into a housebroken pup, he had an education ahead of him. So did I. Our new residence wasn't a home. It was a stage, and the curtains never closed. The palace architects had given us separate rooms with a shared sitting parlor between them, as if that narrow slice of neutral ground might coax civility out of two unwilling partners. The floors gleamed dark as spilled ink. The walls were covered in tapestries of ancient victories, none of them ours. Every time I walked through that parlor I felt like I was being reminded, this is history. You are just another transaction to keep it alive. I set out to break the place with my presence. If the room was a stage, then I would be the loudest actor. At breakfast the next morning, I claimed the head of the table. Not the seat meant for me, not the delicate chair set at the side, but the solid one at the center where every lord of this house once sat. The servants froze like startled rabbits. Kane arrived a moment later, boots quiet on the stone floor. He didn't blink at the sight of me lounging in the seat of command, chin propped in my hand. He simply walked to the chair opposite and sat down. You've taken the wrong seat, he said evenly. No, I answered, with the sweetest smile. I've taken the right one. You just got here too late. His expression didn't shift, but his eyes lingered a second too long. Then I suppose I'll take the latecomer's portion. And he did, calmly cutting his bread while the servants tried not to stare at the battle lines drawn with silverware and posture. I wanted him furious. I wanted slammed fists, raised voices, proof that he had blood under that marble skin. Instead he chewed, drank, and even dabbed his mouth with a napkin like a perfectly civilized statue. I hated it. I hated his coldness more than I would have hated rage. So I tested him. At dinner, I switched our wine cups. He picked his up without hesitation, drank and said mildly, "You've chosen the cheaper vintage." At supper the next night, I pushed the plate away after the first bite and declared loudly, "Poison!" The servants panicked, eyes wide, until Kane set his fork down, took my plate, and finished the entire portion without so much as a hiccup. "Disappointing," he said, wiping his mouth. "If it was poison, it wasn't strong enough." The staff nearly fainted. It became sport. I left my boots in the hallway where he would trip over them. He stepped over them silently, only pausing to remark, "One day you'll discover the joy of storage." I rearranged the library so his military manuals were stacked under my poetry volumes. He returned them exactly as they were, but with a pressed sprig of lavender between the pages of siege tactics. Some nights I spoke deliberately into the silence of the parlor, knowing he could hear from the other side. "Do you snore, General?" A pause. Then, through the wall, "Only when I'm bored." The slamming retort I prepared died in my throat. The servants learned to hover at doorways, entertained and horrified by the spectacle. We gave them a show every day. Two people fencing with words sharp enough to cut. Once, one of the maids tripped and spilled a pitcher of water. Kane rose at once, helped her gather the pieces of the jug, and dismissed her kindly. I watched with narrowed eyes because I had expected cruelty. But cruelty never came. Only that same maddening stone stillness. And it was that stillness that gnawed at me. Anger I could fight. Tenderness I could mock. But his lack of reaction. It left me pacing, restless, as if the war were being lost by my side alone. I would lie awake at night, listening to the faint creak of floorboards beyond the parlor wall, imagining him sitting there, polishing weapons, or reading in silence, unbothered by my existence. And yet, aware of me. Once, crossing paths in the hallway, our shoulders brushed. Just a flicker of contact, accidental. My breath caught, annoyingly sharp. He didn't stop walking, didn't even turn his head, only muttered, "Apologies." "Try not to miss next time," I snapped back, too quickly. His stride didn't falter. But I saw it. That glint, barely there amusement in the corner of his mouth. The first crack in his frost. And damn me, it thrilled something in my chest I did not want thrilled. The war continued. Neither of us won. Neither of us surrendered. The residence became a chessboard. The servants our unwilling audience, and silence itself a weapon. But when the day ended, and I sat alone in that parlor with the tapestries of old conquests staring down at me, I realized something unsettling. I was waiting for his footsteps in the corridor. Waiting. So I could fight again tomorrow. Because maybe I wasn't losing. Maybe I was addicted. If our residence was a battlefield, then the palace archives were my sanctuary. Dust doesn't judge, and books don't bow. They simply sit there, waiting for someone curious or desperate enough to listen. The council sessions were public theater, men with rings heavy enough to crack tables and voices tuned for rhetoric rather than truth. Omegas like me weren't expected to sit in, of course. We were expected to sit out. To smile, nod, exist as symbols of unity, while the actual decisions rotted behind closed doors. Which is why I chose the archives. They smelled of parchment, wax and mildew. The scent of secrets no one bothered to polish. I found my way there after one particularly suffocating council session. The lords had spoken of treaties and taxes, but underneath their careful phrases were hints, slips of the tongue, smiles held too long. It was enough to make me itch, so I followed the itch into the stacks, lamp in hand, until the silence swallowed me. The archivist gave me a bored look and muttered something about omegas and their hobbies. I ignored him. Shelves towered above me, each crammed with records older than my grandfather's grave. I pulled one at random, trade manifests, year 216. Another, marriage contracts between minor clans, stipulations about heirs and collateral. A third, laws regarding bond marks and inheritance. Patterns emerged, like threads in an ugly but deliberate tapestry. Marriages arranged not for love but leverage. Territories ceded quietly, families swallowed into others. My own union was just another echo. I muttered to myself as I traced the ink. So the grand solution to war is to stitch us into silence. A voice behind me. You're not supposed to be here. I nearly dropped the manuscript. Kane stood in the aisle, broad shoulders brushing the edges of dusty shelves. His uniform was less polished here. Boots, carrying a film of dust. He looked out of place, warrior in a library. But somehow he fit, like a sword leaned against a lectern. And yet, I said, recovering. Here I am. He gave me that stare. The one that could have been carved in granite. I should have been cowed. I wasn't. You listen, I continued, rolling the scroll back with more force than necessary, but you don't hear them, do you? The counselors, the way they phrase things. They don't speak of peace, Kane. They speak of ownership. They've turned clans into commodities and people into placeholders. His brows shifted barely, but it was enough to keep me talking. I tapped the parchment. Look, 40 years ago the Heron clan signed over their borderlands in exchange for a strategic marriage. Same language they used about me. You know what happened 10 years later? The clan ceased to exist. His silence was heavy, but not dismissive. I pushed further. I am not blind. They want me in your house because my bloodline is leverage, but they don't expect me to see it. Finally, his voice, low even. Why look at it, if you hate it so much? Because if I understand the rules, I said, pulse quickening, then maybe I can break them. The words hung in the stale air. My hands trembled only slightly as I placed the scroll back on the shelf. His gaze didn't leave me. For once it wasn't cold, it was considering. As if he were weighing me not as burden, but as equation. You're not an ornament, I said, my throat tight. And I'll be damned if I let them make me one. I'm not a decoration for your parlor shelf. His reply was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. I never thought you were. I blinked. Of all the answers, I hadn't expected that one. For a heartbeat, I believed him. And in that heartbeat the granite cracked again. Just a line, hair thin, but enough to show there was something behind it. Not anger, not disdain. Something closer to recognition. I broke the silence with my usual weapon, sarcasm. Careful, General. If you start treating me like a person, people will talk. Let them, he said simply. I gathered my lamp, pretending not to notice the thud of my pulse. As I passed him in the narrow aisle, the brush of his shoulder against mine was deliberate this time. Not dominance, not accident, just presence. The archive swallowed the sound of my footsteps as I walked away, but my mind replayed his words again and again. I never thought you were. For the first time since our binding, the war between us shifted. Not truce, not surrender, but the faintest hint of respect. And respect, I realized, was far more dangerous than hate. The palace gardens at night were a trick. In daylight they looked harmless. Terraces of marble steps, hedges clipped into perfect obedience, roses perfumed for show. But once the torches burned low, and the wind crawled through the branches, the whole place became a labyrinth of shadows. I left the archives late, parchment dust still clinging to my sleeves. My head buzzed with conspiracies I couldn't yet prove. My steps echoed too loudly on the stone path, so I slowed, telling myself it was nothing. Omegas were always watched, protected, contained, restrained. But tonight the air carried something else. A silence that pressed against my ribs. A crunch of gravel behind me. I turned. Nothing. The torchlight swayed, leaves rustled. My heart spiked. I moved faster. The first strike came from the dark, steel flashing where torchlight died. I jerked aside. The blade nicking fabric instead of flesh. A second figure closed in, masked. Silent. Brilliant, I hissed, stumbling back. Of course they'd prefer me dead than inconveniently alive. The garden wall blocked one side, hedges the other. They had cornered me neatly, like a piece on a chessboard. My mind raced. No weapon, no training worth mentioning, only words, which cut poorly against steel. Another lunge. I dodged, breath ragged, vision hot. The torch sputtered. My heel slipped on wet stone and I knew, this was it. Then he appeared. Kane burst from the shadows like the blade they pretended he wasn't. His uniform cloak whipped as he moved, and the torchlight carved his figure into violence. The first assassin's wrist snapped beneath his grip, steel clanged against stone. The second lunged, and Kane's boot sent him sprawling across the gravel. For the first time I saw him not as the cold statue in council halls, but as he must have been on battlefields. Precise, merciless, alive. The attackers regrouped, circling us. Kane shifted his stance, half shielding me without looking back. His breath came even, steady, while mine clawed at my throat. One rushed him. Kane sidestepped, drove an elbow into the man's temple, dropped him limp. Another swung wide, catching Kane's arm with a shallow cut. He didn't flinch, only pivoted, drove the man down with bone-cracking force. And I stood there, useless, with my heart hammering like a prisoner against bars. When silence finally fell, two bodies groaned on the ground. One lay motionless, and Kane straightened, sword slick under torchlight. He looked carved from fire and iron both. I realized I was shaking, not just from fear, though fear thrummed in every nerve, but from something sharper, stranger. I forced my voice out, too high, too fast. Well, at least once in your life you've decided to hold on to me. His eyes flicked toward me, glinting steel. I'm not holding you, he said, voice low, measured. I'm holding the alliance. But his gaze betrayed him. Too intent, too focused on the tremor in my hand, the blood on my sleeve that wasn't mine. You're bleeding, I said, sharper than I meant. It's nothing. That's what people say when it's absolutely something. A flicker of amusement, or maybe irritation, crossed his face. Hard to tell with him. He tore a strip from his cloak, bound the wound tight, movements brisk. The assassins groaned, still alive. Kane gave them a look colder than execution. They won't trouble us again. Us. The word stuck in my chest. How lovely. A marital pronoun. He ignored me, scanning the shadows as if more wolves might leap. His hand hovered near my arm but didn't touch, as though undecided whether I'd allow it. I hated how much I wanted him to. The torches guttered in the breeze. My body vibrated with leftover terror, but underneath it all, something pulsed hotter, unfamiliar, the realization that this man, whom I had mocked for his stone silence, had risked himself without hesitation when steel turned toward me. The court might call me a pawn. He might claim it was duty. But in that garden, with blood fresh on stone, I saw something else. Choice. He finally spoke, quieter. You're trembling. I lifted my chin. I'm furious. Not trembling. His mouth twitched, almost a smile though grim. Good. Anger keeps you alive. He turned, guiding me down the path with that same half-step he always kept. Between us, the one that said I am a wall, but I will not press against you. I wrapped my arms tight across my chest, pretending it was to keep warm. The truth was, I couldn't steady myself otherwise. Behind us, the garden swallowed the groans of the defeated. Ahead, the palace lights flickered like watchful eyes. And in between what nearly happened and what had, my pulse betrayed me, quick and unsteady. I had wanted his fury. I had wanted cracks in his stone. Tonight, I got both. And it saved my life. And I couldn't decide if that made me safer, or infinitely more endangered. The palace healers had fussed more than I liked. A shallow slice across my leg, easily bound. Yet they swaddled it in layers of linen as though I were glass. By the time they finished, I was exhausted from rolling my eyes. Still, the wound throbbed enough to keep me from pacing, so I took refuge in the one place left to me, the library. Candles dripped lazy trails of wax onto brass holders. The shelves breathed parchment dust and wood polish. Silence pressed close, but not unfriendly. I sprawled in a chair, leg propped on a cushion, an open chronicle across my lap. My fingers traced lines of ink left by some dead scribe centuries ago. Patterns whispered. Dynasties rose and crumbled in margins. Marriages brokered. Betrayals signed with wax. The same play we still performed, only with different costumes. You shouldn't be out of bed. His voice was a stone dropped into still water. I looked up. Kane stood in the doorway, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. The image startled me. The soldier bearing porcelain. And yet, I said, echoing the archives, here I am. He set the tray on a low table, movements precise. Steam curled up between us, carrying the scent of mint. Without asking, he handed me a cup. Trying to poison me again? I asked. You'd know by now if I were, he replied evenly, taking his own sip. I smirked, then let the warmth bleed into my palms. The silence that followed was not the brittle sort we usually shared. It was occupied. You were reckless, he said finally. Which part? Reading, walking, or breathing in corridors where assassins lurk? His eyes narrowed, but not in anger. You underestimate how much some would profit from your absence. Trust me, I said, flipping a page with deliberate care, I'm aware. That's why I read. The dead are generous with their warnings. He leaned back, the lamplight catching on the faint line of the fresh bandage around his arm. And what warning have they given you? That my life is a ledger entry. That alliances consume families the way fires consume dry grass. That if I don't learn the rules, I'll be reduced to ash before the ink dries. For once, he didn't argue. His gaze rested on me, unreadable, but I felt its weight. I arched a brow. What? Surprised the Omega can string thoughts together without embroidery in the margins. His reply was quiet. No. Surprised you can read what most refuse to see. That silenced me more than I wanted. I ducked back to the chronicle, heart tapping quicker than before. And you? I asked after a beat. Do the dead whisper to generals too? His jaw tightened. My dead don't whisper, they scream. I didn't expect honesty, not from him. The words scraped raw. I studied the band of scar that cut across his collar, the faint exhaustion behind his eyes. For a moment I imagined the weight he carried, the battles no one in these polished halls wanted to remember. I shut the book softly. Then perhaps we're both haunted. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. A cheerful household then. I laughed, short, startled, genuine. It sounded too loud in the hush of the library, and for once I didn't regret it. He leaned forward, eyes flicking to the manuscript. Show me what you found. I hesitated, then shifted the book between us. Our heads bent closer over the cracked parchment. My hand moved to steady the page just as his did. Skin brushed skin, an accidental graze, fleeting but electric. Neither of us pulled away at once. My breath caught. His fingers stilled, then slowly retreated, deliberate, as though he'd weighed the choice. I forced levity into my voice. Careful, General, people will think you're civil. Worse, he murmured. They might think I'm human. Our eyes met. Candlelight flickered between us, softening the hard lines of his face. And for a heartbeat the war paused. Not truce, not surrender, just a fragile suspension, the kind you almost don't breathe for fear of breaking. I turned back to the book, throat tight. Don't get used to it, I said. Neither should you, he answered. But when he rose to leave, he left the second cup of tea within reach. And I realized, with something dangerously close to warmth, that I wanted him to. The palace slept, or pretended to. Torches guttered in distant corridors, leaving our wing in silence heavy enough to crush. I lay in my bed, staring at the carved canopy, listening to the faint rhythm of Kane's steps in the adjoining room. Steady, deliberate, as if even his insomnia had discipline. I could not bear it anymore. I was tired of being a pawn shuffled across marble floors. Tired of being spoken of, not to. Tired of my body belonging to a treaty inked in someone else's hand. If they wanted me silent, pliant, and ornament, they would not have tonight. I rose. My legs still ached under the bandages, but pain was irrelevant, it was almost welcome. Barefoot, I crossed the shared parlor and stopped at his door. My knuckles hovered, then knocked once. The sound was soft but final, like the strike of a gavel. The door opened almost at once. He stood there, loose shirt, hair unbound, eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. For a moment we simply looked at each other. Theo, he said. A question more than a greeting. I pushed past him into the room. His quarters were stark, no frills, no velvet, just the essential order of a soldier. Bed, desk, trunk. A sword leaning where most men kept books of poetry. Lock the door, I said. His brows pulled together. Why? Because for once this is not for the council, or the clans, or the gods watching overhead. This is mine. Something flickered in his eyes. He closed the door. I stood in the center of his chamber, heart pounding hard enough to bruise ribs. My hands curled into fists, not from fear, but resolve. I'm tired of being their game piece, so tonight, I choose. His gaze was steady, but I saw the shift. Not coldness, not dismissal. Caution. You don't owe me this, he said. I know, I snapped, though my voice trembled. That's why I want it. Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then he stepped closer, slow, deliberate. Then tell me what you want. I hated how my throat tightened. I want at least one night in this cursed marriage to belong to me. Not duty, not law, me. My hands caught his shirt, pulling him down into me before courage fled. His mouth met mine, hard, clumsy, bruising. Not romance. Collision. My teeth caught his lip, his breath hissed, not in anger but restraint. The kiss broke with a ragged sound. My forehead pressed to his. Don't be gentle, I whispered. If you try to cradle me, I'll hate you for it. His hands tightened on my arms, anchoring me without crushing. Then I won't, he said. Clothes were shed without grace, scattered like evidence. The room grew hotter, smaller, until all that existed was skin, breath, the sharp edge of choice. His strength caged me, but it wasn't the cage of the council. It was a wall I had dragged him into building around me. There was pain. Of course there was pain. My nails dug into his shoulders, breath torn between gasps and curses. But pain meant it was real, that I was not being carried on someone else's tide. I wanted at least one night in this life to belong to me. I bit the words into my own lip, swallowed them, felt them burn in every nerve. I chose this. Not a ribbon tying wrists. Not a decree read in marble halls. My choice. Kane's face hovered above mine, jaw clenched, as if he were the one fighting restraint. His movements were controlled, careful even inside the roughness. As if he honored my demand but refused to break me. I hated him for it. I was grateful for it. Both truths burned together. At some point my curses blurred into something else, laughter maybe or sobs, I couldn't tell. He caught my wrist, pinned it to the mattress, and for once I didn't fight. The fire built, crested, broke. The silence afterward roared louder than the act itself. I lay there, chest heaving, skin damp, staring at the ceiling beams as if they might offer answers. My body hurt in ways that reminded me I was alive. My pride hurt worse, because I'd bared more than flesh. Kane rolled away, giving space, but his hand lingered on the sheet between us. He didn't reach for me. He didn't chain me. He simply stayed. I turned my head, meeting his eyes in the half-light. They were not cold. Not tonight. You got what you wanted, he said quietly. No, I corrected, throat raw. I got what I chose. A flicker of something softer than I'd ever seen crossed his face. He nodded once, as if sealing an unspoken pact. I closed my eyes, exhausted, raw, but with a strange calm under the ache. For the first time since the ribbon tied my wrist, I felt less like a prisoner, and more like a man who had lit a match in a locked room, aware it could burn everything, but unwilling to blow it out. The council chamber was designed to intimidate. Stone walls climbed high enough to echo every word. Banners of ancient victories hung heavy as chains, and a dais stretched wide enough to remind everyone where power sat, and where it didn't. Omegas like me weren't meant to stand here, let alone speak. We were meant to sit at the edge, silent as carved figurines, proof that alliances worked because we existed as decoration. Today, I decided the figurine would shatter. They read their reports. Grain quotas, troop movements, border negotiations, words stacked like bricks, building walls to hide the truth I had scraped out of the archives by candlelight. At first, I waited. My hands curled tight in my lap, nails pressing crescents into my palm. I waited for someone else to say it, to name the rot. But no one did. Their voices droned, polite, poisonous. I stood. The scrape of my chair cut through their speeches like a blade. Heads turned. A ripple of surprise crossed the chamber, disbelief that I had the audacity to rise at all. My lords, I said, voice sharper than I intended. You're lying. Silence fell so complete I could hear the blood rush in my ears. A dozen rings glittered as hands froze mid-gesture. A few mouths opened in outrage. You speak out of turn, snapped a counselor, his voice high with indignation. I speak because none of you will, I shot back. You dress up theft as treaties, betrayal as policy. You say marriage is peace, but your ledgers tell the truth. Families consumed, territories gutted, clans erased. Gasps. A few muttered, Omega. One spat the word as though it stank. I lifted a scroll I'd brought from the archives. Here, 40 years ago, the Heron clan united by marriage. Within a decade they were gone. Their lands divided like spoils at a feast. And now you've written the same script for mine. You will be silent, another barked. No. My voice cracked on the word but didn't falter. You made me property, a pawn. But you made a mistake teaching me letters. I read, I remember, and I will not sit quiet while you sharpen your knives behind velvet curtains. The chamber erupted. Shouts, outrage, disbelief, and in the storm, I searched for him. Kane. He sat among them, not on the dais, but close enough to be counted as their blade. His face was unreadable. Granite, as always. No word of support. No hand raised. My chest burned. I had risked everything to speak, expecting anger, expecting resistance, but not his silence. His silence was worse than their noise. You see? I said bitterly, pointing at him. Even the man who risked his life to save mine won't speak now, because it's easier to let the council choke me than to break tradition. His jaw tightened, but still, silence. The council's speaker rose, robes heavy with authority. Omega, he intoned, kneel. Show respect as is proper. You are bound. You will bow. The ritual. The old submission every Omega was expected to perform if they dared raise their voice, to kneel, to prove they still knew their place. I looked at the dais, at the smug faces waiting to see me on the floor. I thought of my father's crest, sold off like cattle. I thought of my clan erased in ledgers. I thought of the ribbon once tied to my wrist. And then, I laughed. The sound startled even me. Sharp, bitter, alive. I stepped forward, spine straight, eyes bright enough to sting. No, I said. Clear, final. Gasps like daggers flew across the chamber. A counselor dropped his quill. Another cursed. The speaker went red as wine. I will not kneel, I declared. Not for you, not for your rituals, not for a peace bought in blood. I am not your ornament, I am not your leash. The silence that followed was thunderous. I turned on my heel. The chamber doors loomed, massive oak, gilded in symbols of unity that mocked me with every step. My pulse roared, but my stride did not falter. When I reached them, I shoved both wide. The slam echoed like an earthquake as they crashed against the stone. Courtiers flinched. Servants scattered. I did not look back. Let them choke on the scandal. Let them whisper of the Omega, who spat on their chains. My hands shook as I strode into the corridor, but my chest felt light, terrifyingly. Light, like a bird realizing the bars were gone, and now it must remember how to fly. Behind me the council chamber boiled in chaos. Ahead of me stretched only silence and the echo of my own footsteps. I walked faster. If Kane wouldn't stand with me, then I would stand alone. But as the oak doors thudded closed behind me, one truth burned brighter than fury. I had broken their ritual. I had chosen my own rebellion. And whether it killed me tomorrow or not, I was free tonight. The night air hit me like a plunge into cold water. Beyond the palace walls, the land spread wide and wild, nothing but dark fields rolling under a restless sky. My feet carried me faster than my thoughts. The echo of the council chamber still clinging to my bones. I'd slammed their doors, torn their ritual to shreds. For the first time in my life I was not bowing. I was not silent. I was free. And yet, freedom was emptier than I expected. I stumbled into the grass, breath sharp, my hands still shaking. The wind combed through the blades, silvering them under moonlight, and for a moment it felt like the earth itself whispered, "What now?" What now, indeed. My whole body thrummed with adrenaline, but underneath it lay a hollowness that frightened me more than any assassin. I had broken their ritual, spat in the council's face, turned my back on every rule. And now I stood alone in a field, the stars watching like indifferent judges. I tipped my head back, laughing once, raw. Well? Is this what you wanted? I asked the sky. Am I free now? Or just a fool waiting to be hunted? No answer. Only wind. Tears prickled, hot and humiliating. I pressed a hand to my mouth, shaking with something too tangled to name. Anger. Relief. Terror. Joy. All of it spilling through cracks I had sealed for years. A sound broke the night, footsteps in the grass. Steady, unhurried. The kind of rhythm that always seemed to belong to him. I turned, already knowing. Kane. Not in uniform. No medals, no cloak, no soldiers at his back. Just a man in plain clothes, shoulders outlined by moonlight. He walked toward me with the same certainty he carried into battle, but slower, as if even the night might shatter if he moved too fast. Come to drag me back? My voice scraped thin, bitter. No. His tone was steady, but softer than I'd ever heard. I came because you left. I laughed, harsh and wet. Then you should be pleased. I spared you the trouble of an inconvenient Omega. His eyes caught mine, and for once they weren't iron. They were, God's help me, bare. You're not inconvenient, Theo. The words struck harder than any blow. I shook my head, stepping back, clutching my arms as if they might hold me together. Don't say things you don't mean. He stopped a pace away, close enough that the heat of him cut the wind. I mean it. The silence stretched. My chest heaved. I wanted to run again, but my legs refused. Finally he spoke the words that unraveled me. You were not chosen for me. But I chose you. His voice dipped lower, rough with something I had never heard in him before. Now it's your turn. Choose. The field tilted. My throat closed. Tears spilled before I could bite them back. I pressed both hands to my face, laughing through the cracks in my breath. Ugly, broken laughter. You don't understand, I choked. All my life, every path was decided before I took a step. my clan's pawn, the council's ornament, even this marriage. I never got to. My voice broke. I never got to be mine. His hand hovered in the air, trembling once before it steadied. He didn't touch me, not yet. He waited. You are, he said simply. The wind pushed between us, cool, sharp. The stars blurred through my tears. For the first time, the choice sat in my hands, heavy and terrifying. I could walk away. I could vanish into the dark, leave him behind with his silence and scars. Or I could stay, not because they demanded it, but because I wanted to. The realization cracked something inside me wider than rebellion had. I dropped my hands, staring at him. His face was shadow and moonlight, but his eyes were clear. For once, they weren't unreadable. They asked, only asked. And I laughed again, softer this time, wet and ridiculous. Damn you, I whispered. You waited until I was free, didn't you? To say it. He didn't deny it. I took one step forward, then another, until the space between us closed, and I pressed my forehead to his chest. Fists curled into his shirt like a drowning man clutching driftwood. His breath shuddered once, then steadied. His arms came around me, not as chains, not as a claim. Just there. Warmth, weight, steady. I choose, I said, voice muffled against him. Not because they want me to. Not because you need me to. But because for the first time I can. The field was silent but for wind and our breaths. Stars scattered above like witnesses. My tears soaked his shirt, his hand pressed to the back of my head as if anchoring me. For the first time it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like flight. The house was quieter than any palace, warmer than any council chamber, and, annoyingly, still Kane's idea of order. His boots always lined up by the door, his sword always polished, his shirts folded like military banners, and my books were always scattered like a rebellion across the table. Do you catalog chaos for fun? Kane asked one morning, or is it instinct? I looked up from my pile of scrolls, sipping tea with exaggerated grace. If I didn't keep my chaos near at hand, you'd polish me too. He set down his cup, dry as winter stone. You're already difficult enough to polish. I smiled, slow and sharp. That's the point. This was our new rhythm, bite and parry, strike and counter. Once it had been war. Now it was our language. I hurled sarcasm like sparks. He met me with granite laced with just enough irony to keep me guessing. And somehow, it felt like peace. Not peace in the council's sense. Not ink on a treaty. The kind that slipped into mornings and late evenings, into shared cups of tea and silences that no longer cut. Outside our walls, politics churned. Rumors of new factions, whispers of treaties dangling like bait. The council hadn't forgotten my defiance, nor had they forgiven it. I hadn't forgotten their hunger either. But now I wasn't standing alone in their halls. I had him. And to my eternal irritation, he had me. We were supposed to be symbols. Instead, we became conspirators. He with his strategies, I with my archives. When I muttered about coded language in the ledgers, he leaned over my shoulder, pointing out troop placements. When he heard whispers in barracks, he brought them to me, and I cross-checked against old decrees. Together, we pulled threads. Together, we sharpened them into needles. It was almost enjoyable. If you ignored the fact that half the realm wanted to gut us. One evening, the fire burned low, throwing shadows over the walls. I sprawled in the armchair, feet dangling off one armrest, ignoring decorum. Kane sat across the room, sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening. Do you ever stop? I asked. His eyes flicked up. Do you? I tipped my head back, grinning. Touché. The silence stretched, but now it was comfortable. My chest ached with something I refused to name too easily. It was easier to lace it with thorns, as always. You know, I said into the air, you're still insufferable. The corner of his mouth twitched, that almost smile I'd come to treasure more than I'd ever admit. And yet, he said, sliding the whetstone down the blade, voice dry but softer than stone had any right to be. You stayed. I rolled my eyes toward the ceiling, hiding the heat that climbed my throat. Poor judgment, clearly. His gaze lingered on me, quiet, steady. Or choice. The word hummed in the room, weighty, alive. My heart stumbled. Once, I would have spat at it, denied it, drowned it in sarcasm. But tonight, I let it stand. The fire cracked. The wind shifted outside. And for the first time in a long line of histories, I realized I wasn't just a pawn inked into someone else's ledger. I was a man who had chosen. And I would keep choosing, even if it meant putting up with the most unmovable, impossible, exasperating alpha the clans had ever spat out. I smirked into the firelight, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing my chest soften. Still unbearable, I muttered. He slid the blade back into its sheath, rose and crossed the room. His shadow fell over me, steady, warm. His mouth quirked. And yet you chose to stay. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because he was right. And for once, I didn't mind letting him win.